When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. Today's video, I wanted to talk about a theory I don't think I've ever talked about on this channel. I might have talked about it once very early on in the lifespan of this channel, and my thoughts have evolved. My opinions on theories have changed. I want to talk about the theory that Preston Jacobs popularized in the Lemon Gate theory, or the idea of the mystery of Daenerys' youth in the House of the Red Door with the lemon tree outside of her window. Many fans, and Preston Jacobs really led the way on this theory, introduced the possibilities of Daenerys' memories being wrong. Now, I want to say what the popular and what we know from the upfront information, what Dany believes occurred. So Daenerys was born in 284 AC at the tail end of Robert's rebellion. Now we know that she would not be captured by Stannis and his fleet, that she would be ushered away with her brother Viserys by Willem Darry and taken to Braavos. From here, she would live out the very beginning of her life. Until she turned 5 years old, she then was forced to leave Braavos as some servants apparently took all of the remaining money after Willem Darry died. Now, Willem Darry during this time period was basically bedridden. He was sick. He was not adept. He just was in a state almost similar to like maybe Maester Aemon towards the end of his life in A Feast for Crows. And so at that point, that's where we see where Daenerys then leaves with her brother Viserys at about her age. She would have been 5 years old, leaving the House with the Red Door. So she was extremely young. Viserys himself, when he goes into exile, is about 8 or 9 years old. So again, these are two very young children. Now, Viserys, by the time they would have left Braavos, or at least the House of the Red Door, he would have been around 13 to 14 years old, depending on what you believe his actual age was exactly in his birth date, but it would have been in that time frame. So that's kind of the groundwork for where, from the common knowledge of what we know in the story, where Daenerys grew up, and that's what she believes herself. Now, let's think about that for a second. So there's a couple things that a lot of people poke at this right away. One, the way Daenerys describes where she grew up, it seemed more like a great atmosphere. It was sunny, running on the grass, going to the House with the Red Door, looking outside, seeing these lemon trees. That doesn't really add up with the description that we're given of Braavos through Arya and even Samwell, where it's much more murky. It seems to be always raining or cloudy, very different from what we see with Daenerys, with it being kind of sunny and almost like a nice summer's day in the Reach, for instance. It's kind of like the vibe you kind of get from her retelling of it, right? And the lemon tree, we have multiple associations with it being linked to Dorne, and also that in Braavos, they, for one, do not have trees really, and two, they also cannot grow lemons in Braavos. So right away, there's some conflicting information with Daenerys' reports. Daenerys says that this was in Braavos, that she lived in Braavos, but at the same time, some of the things behind that don't seem to add up. Now, I do believe that there is an explanation. So, the way I think this goes down has to be started with a quote that we get in A Dance with Dragons about her past. So this is said by Quentyn Martell when he delivers a letter to Daenerys Targaryen. The parchment was written in the common tongue. The queen unrolled it slowly, studying the seals and signatures. When she saw the name Sir Willem Darry, her heart beat a little faster. She read it over once and then again. "May we know what it says, your grace?" asked Sir Barristan. "It's a secret pact," Dany said, "made in Braavos when I was just a little girl. Sir Willem Darry signed for us, the man who spirited my brother and myself away from Dragonstone before the usurper's men could take us. Prince Oberyn Martell signed for Dorne, with the Sea Lord of Braavos as a witness." She handed the parchment to Sir Barristan so he might read it for himself. "The alliance is to be sealed by a marriage," it says, "in return for Dorne's help overthrowing the usurper. My brother Viserys is to take Prince Doran's daughter Arianne for his queen." So this would have had to have been very, very close to the end of Robert's Rebellion. I think the easiest time to track when this happened is we get rumors that Oberyn was trying to put Viserys Targaryen on the throne very soon after the quote-unquote end of Robert's Rebellion. It goes so far as Jon Arryn has to visit Dorne to kind of calm the seas. If that is the case, Daenerys would have been again, less than 2 years old, likely when this was signed. And what I want to point out right away about this letter and why I think it's important. If Daenerys was brought up in Dorne, like many suggest based on the lemon tree and the multiple accounts of lemons being grown in Dorne, right away it might make sense to say, oh yeah, she was born in Dorne. Well, obviously, right? If you even want to go even further and suggesting that Daenerys was actually the child of Rhaegar and Lyanna, it would make sense given the Tower of Joy is right there in Dorne. It would make a lot of sense for her to be transferred into Dorne and maybe grow up there. But my biggest issue with this is, if that is the case, why is Quentyn delivering a letter that suggests that Daenerys was in Braavos, that the Sea Lord of Braavos was relevant here to overseeing this pact being signed? If that's the case, wouldn't Willem Darry already be in Dorne, and wouldn't he just be negotiating with Oberyn? He wouldn't need the Sea Lord of Braavos to oversee this, and why is the Sea Lord of Braavos in particular seeing the signing of this? That part doesn't really add up. So right away, there's some doubt here as to why she would be brought up in Dorne. If you even think about the way the Dornish and the Martells play the Game of Thrones, it makes no sense to have Daenerys and Viserys occupying and living in Dorne, because it's a huge risk to them. Yes, the Dornish want to get revenge, but Doran isn't stupid. Doran realizes they can't take on Westeros by themselves. Viserys at this point is no warrior. He's 8 or 9. He's a kid. He can't take over the Iron Throne. And so it makes no sense to take this huge risk for a kid that you don't even know if he's going to be a good king or anything like that. Right? And so I think that's kind of where, if you're Doran, you step in and go, Oberyn, this is just not going to work. We can do something in the future, but we need to wait. And it also goes into the idea of, okay, this pact was signed, right? Why wasn't Viserys and Arianne, why weren't they ever betrothed when Viserys becomes more of a man? He starts becoming, 14 years old when they leave Braavos, when he starts getting older. I mean, not to say someone is a man at 14, but if you're looking at Westerosi standards, getting into, being a man, getting to 14, 15, 16, the subject's never broached. And I think it's more that Doran wanted to see what Viserys could do. If Viserys could prove himself as a valuable ally, you're not going to support Viserys if he just doesn't have anything to offer, because once again, it's you versus Westeros. And so I think right away, the first theory that Daenerys grows up in Dorne, I just don't think makes any sense when you look at what we get in A Dance with Dragons. I think this theory would have made a ton of sense, back before we got A Dance with Dragons. Right before it would have made a lot of sense, because there was a lot of information there that was kind of misleading about Daenerys' background and didn't seem to add up. Now, the next point about the lemon trees, so let's establish that right away. Right away, in both of Arya's chapters, it's actually kind of funny that we see this through Arya quite a lot, is that lemon trees are most notably associated with Dorne. And we even see a little bit later on that lemons cannot grow in Braavos because of their climate. That makes a ton of sense. So what better way to answer this question is, okay, the Sea Lord of Braavos had some connection to Willem Darry already, that he was willing to oversee a pact between Dorne and Willem Darry, Daenerys, and Viserys. Well, wouldn't it make sense if the Sea Lord of Braavos was the one housing Daenerys? I think that makes a lot of sense. And it would also make sense why it seems like they were living so nicely early on after the rebellion. Even think about Daenerys and Viserys. This is very shortly after they were taken off the throne. They still would have been, viewed kind of like a similar idea of Daemon Blackfire's line, right? As they are somebody that you can stick your bets on, right? If the Targaryens come back into power, they're going to remember the Sea Lord of Braavos, and they're going to reward him very handsomely. Same idea with like Illyrio, right? And Pentos in the normal story, when it starts. And so that to me adds up a lot. And so when you get to this lemon tree thing, well, the Sea Lord of Braavos is extremely powerful, extremely rich. We have an idea that there are these kind of like greenhouse type things that can be done. We see that even in Winterfell. It makes a lot of sense to me that somebody that would want the delicacies of fruits and things like that would try and grow their own. If you have the funds to do that, it's not a very far jump in logic to conclude that they could do something like having a lemon tree, right? I don't think that's all that big. And you even might be thinking, well, the lemon tree seems to be, quite big. It kind of seems like it's more not in a greenhouse. It's not really what Daenerys kind of equates it to. But I'm going to use an example when we talk about Daenerys and her childhood and things that she remembers and equate it to my own, what I've seen with other people when they grow up and the things that they experience. We'll talk about that in a second. But to me, it makes pretty perfect logic that the Sea Lord of Braavos may want some of those things outside of having to pay, other people for them. Why not build a greenhouse, make your own, right? It makes sense to me. You have the servants to do it. You have the ability and means to do those type of things. And especially in Braavos, where those things don't grow naturally, you could actually sell that stuff for a profit, right? You could sell your, fruits that you're making and turn that into a profit. Just because during the main story that's not being done doesn't mean that it was never done before, that people weren't, taking in goods, making their own farm, and then reselling them within Braavos. That just might not be the case during the normal story. The other thing that people like to think about with the housing that Daenerys was in, it seems to be very, wooden and carved in like these animals type description. That's something that in Braavos is also really weird because there aren't trees to build wooden buildings. Braavos is described as being basically all stone. Once again, doesn't really equate because the Sea Lord of Braavos, if you believe that is where Daenerys could have been housed if she was in Braavos, it makes perfect sense that he would be able to afford wood and things like that. It's the same idea of the lemon tree. He has the means to do it. He could. Does that mean he did? We don't have enough information to, again, conclude that, right? There is no description of this house ever really existing anywhere, not just Braavos, but anywhere. So we're kind of grasping at what we have, the information that's available. So let's then move to Daenerys' memory. So Daenerys remembers Braavos much differently than it appears like it was. Now, I want to preference. Daenerys was only 5 years old when they left Braavos, when Willem Darry died. So Daenerys' memories that she's working off of are more than likely from the ages of 4 to 5. I am someone, maybe this is just a me thing, people's memory works way differently and all that stuff. I could not tell you something I remember from when I was 3 or 4 or anything like that. I think the first memories I remember truly having are when I was around 5 years old, and I'm going to equate this very similarly. So when I was 5 years old, I went to Disney World, and Disney World is a place that when you're a kid, it's just way bigger, it's more magical, it's just something that's completely different. And so when you go back, a couple years, or if you even think about it, right? Because when I was going to Disney World, the second time that I went, so later on in my life, I had already pictured what it was going to be like, what it was going to look like, even especially like the Star Wars ride that they had. I had that in my mind as a certain way that I thought it looked like. I went back. Yes, I'm older now. The place has gotten bigger. My memories were not accurate to what I was equating them with, what they are now and what they actually were. And so when you think about that here, where Daenerys is only a couple of years old, her memories would have made everything way bigger. It would have, again, her memory wouldn't have been that distinct. All it takes is, a couple of days where it was sunny in Braavos, or maybe just it was cloudy, and Daenerys could equate that to, oh yeah, this is what my childhood was like, right? I grew up in a place where, maybe 30, 40 years ago, it was a great, thriving, town. I wouldn't say city, but it was more, town. And now it's, very much filled with crime. It's not great. And it was already being that way when I was growing up. That's not something I remember. I don't remember, when I was younger growing up in a place that, wasn't necessarily dangerous, but it was growing to be that point. It was a place that was becoming more run down. I remember the good parts about that. And so I equate a lot of Daenerys' misremembering of things, or things that maybe she is thinking are better than they were. Because you think about Daenerys' situation. Daenerys has never had a home. The closest thing Daenerys has ever had to a home was probably the Sea Lord's palace, right? That was probably the closest thing she ever had to a home. And so, of course, she's going to remember it very fondly, because when you get all these quotes of remembering who she is by Quaithe and things like that, and she's dreaming about the House of the Red Door, she's dreaming about her home. And I think she's dreaming, I think Quaithe wants her to remember that she's a Targaryen. If you think about her whole arc in Book 5, is that she's growing apart from the dragons. She's growing apart from the Targaryens. She's giving in to more and more of the Marinese and other cultures, and she's becoming less like a Targaryen. That's, I think, a lot about what Daenerys 10 is, her last chapter, is about. It's about her finally reclaiming herself as a Targaryen. That's what I think a lot of what Winds of Winter is going to be, her dealing with that issue. And so I think that this is not as important as some people make it out to be. I think that Daenerys' home and whatever you believe, wherever she came from, and again, I'm not going to deny, I think her living some other place than Braavos has, legitimate arguments to it. It has legitimate evidence to it. I just don't prefer the theory. I think there are explanations about how certain things could have gone down. I will say that I don't think it's as important. I think that the Red Door is meant to represent, and I think Preston Jacobs says this in his video explaining this as well, it's meant to represent a home, something that Daenerys is longing for. Daenerys does not long for the Iron Throne and all these things. She longs for security and a home and to be able to help the people that she's freed and all of those things, and she's never found that. She's still searching for it. She believes that the Iron Throne and going back to Westeros, where her family reigned for 300 years, could be that security for her, and she's going to realize that isn't the thing, and she will long more and more for this house with the Red Door. I am one of those people that believe that this reveal in A Dance with Dragons with Quentyn's letter and this pact between Oberyn, Willem Darry, and then also with the Sea Lord of Braavos kind of confirms that Daenerys grew up in Braavos. I've just kind of always believed that. I never really bought into this theory all that much. Again, I think what Ricky said when we talked about Ned and Ashara applies to this theory really well. I think this theory, for being a theory, 10 years ago, is a fantastic theory, but I don't think it's necessarily aged all that well, just in terms of the more knowledge we gain about the story, the information that's come out. But I do think, yes, I think there are reasons to question Daenerys' past, but I don't necessarily think that means she grew up in Dorne or she grew up in some other places. Again, I didn't fully get into the theory because to address this theory, you also have to address some people also believing that Daenerys is Rhaegar and Lyanna's child. But I personally don't believe that either, so that deserves its own other video. And let me know if you guys would like me to do that kind of a video. Just something I wanted to add at the end of the video. I also want to ask the question, why would Viserys lie to Daenerys about where they grew up? What is the motivation there? If they did grow up in Dorne, Viserys would have known that. Where he would remember growing up someplace that wasn't what they were telling Daenerys. Why would you lie to Daenerys about that? It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. What does it matter if Daenerys thinks they're in Braavos, but they're actually in Dorne? Why would you keep that information from her? So, yeah, that's another thing I wanted to add here at the end of the video as I was editing that I kind of thought about and forgot to put in the video. But let me know what you guys think. Do you agree with the theory? Do you think that there's more evidence that maybe we should look at for this idea? But yeah, I hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye, guys.